invited to pull up a chair on Lisa Harper's back porch, where faith meets real life. Welcome to Back Porch Theology. Each episode helps you dive deeper into God's Word and discover that the gospel isn't just good news for eternity. It's great news for everyday life, because God is for you, and He's always been restoring our value and drawing us closer to Him. With honest conversations, a few laughs, and guests ranging from close friends to brilliant theologians, Back Porch Theology is thoughtful, meaningful, and never stuffy. So grab some coffee or sweet tea and join Lisa Harper on Back Porch Theology. Subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts.
The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm Dr. James Spencer, and I am joined today by Dr. Daniel Hawk. He is a professor of Old Testament and Hebrew at Ashland Theological Seminary, and he's the author of a new book called Undoing Manifest Destiny, Settler America, Christian Colonists, and the Pursuit of Justice. And so today we're going to be talking about a lot of the concepts from the book and hopefully introducing you to some different ways of thinking about what it looks like to be a Christian in America, but maybe also a Christian anywhere else. So, Dan, welcome to the program. It was really great to be here. I'm glad we can make this happen.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your interest in the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I mentioned, I'd had a couple of other sets of authors on these very similar topics. I think, not necessarily straight on similar, but the guys who wrote Reading the Bible from Turtle Island, and then Terry Wildman who's doing some of the Native American translations of the New Testament. And so this is becoming a really interesting area. So, I was drawn to this work, and I'm finding these new topic areas really interesting. I guess my first question for you would be, what drew you into this book? You're an Old Testament guy. What drew you into this conversation?
Yeah. Well, it's been a long journey, and it started earlier in my career. I did some work in the book of Joshua that was well received, and I had some colleagues challenge me not to just keep it within the ivory tower, so to speak, but to think about how my work on Joshua might impact Christian mission and related topics. So I took that to heart, and I thought, well, what would Joshua have to say to the United States? And immediately, this kind of parallel conquest narrative shows up. I mean, so Joshua is Israel's conquest narrative. Joshua tells how and why Israel got the land, took the land, and took it away from the indigenous inhabitants under the command of God, and with God's help and the help of the Holy Spirit. And our national mythology tells very much the same kind of story in one way or another. We were empowered by and called by God to establish a new nation, and we did that by dispossessing the people who were already here. And so that got me going, and that got me into reading a lot of American history on indigenous settler relationships. And it just kind of, the more I read, the more I thought, man, this is really hard stuff. And we're not, and I don't know that we've ever talked about it, either as Christians or as a nation. I mean, to the extent that it really deserves to be talked about. So, long story short, I started speaking on this as kind of an avocation, and went to some conferences, met some folks, met indigenous scholars, and developed some good and lasting friendships, like with Terry Wildman. I'm working with him right now. He invited me in to talk on the Translation Council. We're working on Genesis through 2 Kings right now. So a lot of fun. So I wrote a book about 15 years ago called Joshua in 3D, and just started writing on this topic. And I was at IVP a couple of summers ago, and just noticed that they were publishing a lot of works along this line. So I pitched the book, and they said yes, and so I wrote it.
For people who may not be as aware of the Joshua narrative, why don't you give a little bit of a thumbnail sketch? I don't expect you to give the whole message of your book, but help people understand and frame sort of how you're approaching this work through the lens of your work on Joshua.
Yeah. So one of the things I would say about the book of Joshua is it's a book that establishes Israelite identity, and it there's a real fusion of history and identity. Every iteration, every expression of our past as a nation, whether ancient or modern, is an act of identity formation. Narratives tell us who we are and what distinguishes us from every other nation, and so on and so forth. So in Joshua is, in a sense, the culmination of the promise that God makes to Abram in Genesis chapter 12. You leave your family and your kindred, go to the place that I will show you. And so Israel enters the land, called by God to do so, and in obedience. So it enters the land in obedience to a divine call, and in fulfillment, and from God's perspective, in fulfillment to promises. And they go in there, and God says, I'll do the fighting for you, and I will defeat the indigenous peoples, and your job is basically to settle and finish that operation, settle, and make sure that they don't contaminate you in any way, or lead you away from God. And so it's a narrative that just talks about how God basically made Israel an invincible force that expelled all the peoples of the land, and then Israel settled it, and they marked their settlement with monuments here and there. So when you put that against the way we talk about as Americans, this is our story. We are an exceptional nation. We are a nation that has been chosen by God, or by virtue of just our unique sensibility and kind of the progress of civilization. We came here under a transcendent impulse. Or I should say, the first English colonists came here under an impulse that was greater than they were themselves. And so for those who take a Christian view of that, God enabled the earliest English settlers to overcome the peoples of the land and just push steadily westward. And so there's the same pattern of in a sense, wiping out and dispossessing the indigenous people. And then here we look at all the monuments we put up to ourselves, and all the ways that we remember, because that's what monuments are. They're part of the catechetical structure that teaches us about who we are as a nation.
Yeah. Interesting, the parallels. And I think just to make sure I'm understanding and clarifying, as we read the biblical narrative, we're seeing this, and this is obviously in, authoritative scripture. And so we're understanding this as something that's been passed down to us as a faithful rendering of the story of God and Israel, versus maybe the difference between the story that we tell about America and its founding.
Right.
And we do have these other Old Testament analogs as well along the way, where you could sort of see parallels between what is happening with America, tying God into the fate of our nation in ways that would seem to underwrite basically whatever we want to do.
Right.
Versus God saying, no, you've done this, but it doesn't mean that I find it legitimate. I mean, right. I look at some of those, like even Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar is called God's servant. And yet the way that Babylon is going to treat the Israelites is going to bring punishment upon Babylon.
Yeah.
And so there's this real intricate line, I think, that we draw between maybe this is my question for you, I guess. When I read the Old Testament, it's like yes, God's moving the nations about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that he's authorizing everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
It simply means that he needs this displaced and this moved in. But the way that that's done can be deeply problematic and outside of what God would really want to have had happen. Am I close on that?
Yeah, I'm resonating with a lot of what you said there. I would put it this way.
Okay.
The book of Joshua is not a template. It is.
Yeah, that's great.
It is a one time. It is a remembrance of the past, in which God, through God's power and in faithfulness to God's promises, established the nation of Israel in a homeland where they could bear witness to this God who had delivered them from bondage in Egypt and had brought them into a good and verdant land. So, when we read texts like this as a template, okay, that's what that means. Okay, this is our pattern. So let's do it. It is, I think, profoundly. It is a profound misunderstanding.
Gotcha.
Of both understanding what this scripture does and how it is to shape Christian life and faith.
That's helpful. So let me now pivot, because I think this will connect. In the book, you talk about wanting to, I don't think these are your words, but unwinding the settler narrative, sort of challenge the settler narrative. And so can you talk a little bit about what that means? I assume it has something to do with this sort of templating, pulling the template over and saying, we're going to do this. But what does that look like now for us to unwind that settler narrative?
Well, that's the central question. So beginning at Jamestown and Plymouth, Boston, New England, the Christian settlers who came first to these shores came with the belief that God had brought them to this place. And simply speaking, they developed a whole set of precedents and patterns and perspectives in relationship to the people who were already here.
Okay.
And they had in mind, for various reasons, this belief that God has given us this land and we need to go in and occupy it. And as they did, they did some pretty atrocious, and I would say sinful things. So there's this bit of sin that's at the root of our story as a Christian people in this nation and as a nation itself. There is a script. I mean, and this is from the very earliest. In the case of Plymouth, within 2 years of the founding of Plymouth, there are some atrocities, preemptive strikes, treachery on the part of these English settlers who bore the name of Christ, but found a way to justify what they did. And as this script, in a sense, developed and replicated and revised and expanded as this nation expanded westward, there were just some really atrocious things that we did. And what we did as well was that we justified that with a myth of innocence. So everything that we did, in a way, had an explanation that we could reconcile with our values or with our Christian beliefs. I'm saying ours. I'm talking about the white settlers colonists who came here. So this colonial enterprise established structures, social, economic, political structures for the benefit, which the colonists constructed for their benefit. And those structures have never been really addressed. They were built on kind of unequal relationships with the peoples of the land and other peoples so that we could gain dominion as white Christians. But the key point here is that they've never really been challenged. And the way to challenge those structures and to begin the process of healing, we're not doing this just to be angry and bash, bring shame,
Right.
Shame and blame. This, if you don't acknowledge your sin, we all know what it does. Sin just doesn't fade away. If we don't acknowledge it and confess it and begin to turn in a different way, it's just going to fester. And so what this nation has done is created a myth of innocence that, in a sense, explains the structures and inequities that we have in those structures, so that to challenge the structure, you've got to challenge the narrative that justifies it first. And when you do that, then you take the foundation away from kind of saying, well, everything we did was good, and you begin to bring to the surface things that, as I hear people tell me often when I go to speak, I never heard that before. I had no idea. Well, there's a good reason. We wanted to keep it covered up. Because that's important. So the last piece I would say is this bears connection into the present day. Those structures are still here. And so I would propose that much of the violence that racks our nation, the kind of the love of guns, the racial strife, all of that is rooted in paradigms and a script that was established during the earliest colonial times and has gone all the way. It's still here, and it damages us. It damages us as a nation. It continues to not address justice that has long been denied to our Indigenous sisters and brothers. And I believe the love of Christ compels us, and our identity as ministers of reconciliation compels us to address this. It's time. It's way past time.
Does your faith feel thin or rushed? If you're spiritually hungry for depth and beauty, Heaven Meets Earth is for you. In this new devotional, philosopher-artist Josh Nadeau invites you into a deeper engagement with faith through a 40-day visual journey of the Nicene Creed, revealing the sacred in the ordinary. With stunning iconographic art and profound theological reflection, Heaven Meets Earth bridges ancient Christian tradition and modern life. It's designed for those weary of surface-level spirituality, guiding you to encounter God through contemplation, prayer, and beauty. Whether you're seeking to deepen your faith during Lent or need a spiritual refresh, discover how Heaven Meets Earth in your daily life. Get your copy of Heaven Meets Earth today and embrace the beauty of belief.
This month on the Salvation Army's weekly podcast, Words of Life, we're wrapping up a series where we've been focused on Christian writers and authors of all kinds. And beginning March 11th, we'll start sharing a testimony where you'll hear from members of a Salvation Army band right after they returned home from a powerful trip and ministry opportunity in South Africa.
One of the lasting effects that I have of the entire trip was hearing the kids sing back to us.
There's a chorus that says, "What shall I render to Jehovah, for he has done so much for me." And to hear kids who have been abandoned sing that with every bit of their spirit back to God, I will never forget that.
Listen to Words of Life wherever you get your podcasts or visit wordsoflifepodcast.org.
I think what struck me when I was reading your book, and then also just some of the other things that I've looked at, is what I'll call the construction of a civil religion.
Mm-hmm.
I think that co-opting, for instance, of the Exodus narrative, the framing of the British as the tyrants and the colonists as the escaping Israelites, is a perversion of that narrative, because the way it was used was, yes, we need political liberation so we can live how we'd like to. But in the Old Testament, that's not what it is. It's a liberation, has there is a political change of the orders, but that change of order doesn't mean that we get to live how we want to. It means that we live under the rule of God. God is our sovereign, and that these are the laws that Israel was to follow, and those kind of things. I think that aspect of the narrative is conveniently left out. And so as I was reading your book, I said, I'm seeing a lot of the parallels that you're highlighting and saying, these are given enough religious language to justify what's happening, but not so much that it critiques what's happening. Right. It always stays right there on the line of this legitimates what I'm doing, but I don't want the Bible to speak against what I'm doing. I just wanted to say it's okay what I'm doing. Is that a fair assessment? Just sort of broad strokes of the things you found?
Yeah, I think that puts it well. I think part of the genius of our founding fathers on this particular issue is that they realized and held very tightly to this idea that religion is absolutely central for a healthy society. Yeah. But they also were aware, and many of them had come out of places where religion had become toxic. Christianity had become toxic. So they knew what could happen. So what they did quite intentionally was to develop this idea that many call a civic religion. And they did that, as other nationalizing groups were doing at the time, to give a sense of transcendence that could unite 13 squabbling, bickering states
right,
into one nation, a united states. And so they needed religion to do that. And so they transferred a lot of the Christian symbols. So the Pilgrims, the Puritans' errand into the wilderness became this kind of national mission. Salvation from sin became salvation from tyranny, and so on and so forth. And so Anthony D. Smith, who's written a lot on this, I think really helpfully, especially a book called Chosen Peoples, talks about how these nationalizing movements like the United States basically concocted an alternative religion. So, and if you think about it, I mean, our kind of national civil religion acts just like a religion. We have holy days. We have our own scriptures in the Constitution, so on and so forth. We use a lot of the language of the sacred when we talk about our nation. So, anyway. All to say yes and amen. I think you really hit it.
Let's talk a little
religion.
Yeah, it just strikes me that there's so much of that across what you've written, and so I wanted to bring it out for folks. As you challenge this settler narrative, what do you think comes of it? You talked about some of the structures. Maybe it'd be good to give a couple of examples of those structures. When you were just saying it earlier, what my mind went to was a particularly enduring or durable set of systemic sin. And so almost like if we made it a rule that none of us could wear clothes outdoors, that's going to have a durable effect, an ongoing effect on our livelihoods, no matter how you slice it, right?
Yeah, right.
And so when we say it like that maybe that gives people enough of a context to say, oh, okay, I could see how that would work. The last place I want to be put is, out in a tent somewhere and think that somebody's going to, that I'm going to survive. Promise you I won't. And so there are different structures that we can envision in our own minds having difficulty living within. Is that the sort of idea that you're trying to convey with that structural problem, the structures that were put in place in the colonial times that are now still causing problems?
Yeah, colonialism is all colonists set up a structure where they have dominion, and everybody else has to kind of live under their power and their leadership, and they're tied to the land. So one of the really earliest expressions of this is that the Puritans, when they came here, they really strongly gravitated toward the creation mandate. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Read Genesis 2, Adam tills the ground. So when they looked around at this pagan landscape, this wild place, this wilderness, and they looked at some of the customs of the people, which they were not they were not Christian,
right?
And they just viewed as satanic. And the fact that indigenous people of the area didn't own property. I mean, they moved in ways that sustained them based on the season where they were. So they would plant crops and harvest, and in the fall, then they would go on winter hunts and so on and so forth. And when the Pilgrims looked at this, they said, "Boy, this is exactly what we were sent to rectify. These people are not fulfilling the basic mandate that God gave to all human beings on creation." And from the English perspective, the colonial perspective meant, the way you do this and faithfully fulfill this command is you order the land, you fence it off, you make it into private property, you put domestic animals in there instead of wild animals, all these things. And so as they expanded and got more territory, they in a sense justified what they were doing, and in some pretty deceptive and violent ways to deprive people of the land. They exerted their own dominion, and they really didn't question whether they were right or wrong, whether their interpretation was appropriate or not. There was just this certitude. This is what God has given us to do. These people are not obeying. So in a sense, they're less than Christians. So our kind of mandate toward them is to take care of them, lead them to Christ. Later on, that became to civilize them, make us assimilate them into white Anglo-Saxon culture in the 19th century. So it's this kind of idea that the English colonists who came here had a very clear sense of what Christianity looked like and what they were to do. And that was to the detriment of the indigenous people whose cultures they did not respect. They were savage and primitive and so on and so forth. So it was all kind of a matter of, and you see this all the way through the early 20th century, this idea that land is to be developed and or as the Puritans said, improved. So here we are in the 21st century, and we've commodified the land. The land is something to be exploited, to enrich, to drill, and we're still in this mode of saying the whole purpose of land is to enrich us and fulfill us in some way, rather than perhaps understanding a different relationship to creation and a different interpretation of the Bible and the Genesis text that says we are stewards of the land, we are caretakers, the land sustains us. And that's where the fact that we have refused to listen to indigenous peoples give us a different perspective that might change us. We've been in charge as white people, And we don't need to listen to them because their ideas are not as advanced and sublime and Christian as ours.
So let me ask this, because I think, as I think about that understanding of it, the way you just explained it, one of the questions that's sort of pinging around in my head is, it doesn't feel like this would affect the individual as much, although I think even that way of phrasing it is probably way off.
Yeah.
Right. So it maybe the better way to say it is, this almost feels like it's going to affect the individual in part because it squeezes out their culture. In other words, it feels like there's some sort of an invasion of collective remembering that comes in and says, no, now you're going to remember like this, and you're no longer going to be able to remember like this. And that fracturing and pulling apart does detriment to both sides.
Yes.
Jennings' work on Christian imagination, I think, illustrates this really beautifully. You know, that the displacement that happens in colonization is two ways.
Right.
The person who's thrown off the land is displaced, but then the person who has come to this land is also in a foreign space, and they don't exactly know what to do with it. But it just feels to me that there's a sense in which we're losing out because we're missing the beautiful aspects of their culture, the good aspects of other cultures, the true aspects of other culture. And we're assuming that ours is sufficiently complete that we don't need to hear from anyone else.
Yeah.
Is that an appropriate way, to sort of frame this issue?
Well, I think one of the important things that you've just said there is the sense that the damaging aspects of colonization damage both sides. So the indigenous people are in need of healing. I mean, in terms of all that they have had to endure.
Yeah.
But white society needs healing because the colonization has warped us in certain ways. And so the focus isn't, I don't think it's proper to lay blame too much on either side at this point. Is to say, how do we begin to create a space where we can begin to repair our relationships? And in order to repair relationships, you've got to give dignity to the people who are on the other side and hear their stories. Yeah. And let them talk about their pain. And that is something that historically white society has, and even white Christianity has not really been willing to do. We need to create these spaces so that, in a sense, acknowledging the settler history, I think, is a way of saying to indigenous people, okay, here's a way that we can begin to show you that we're listening by embracing this. But we want to create a space where all truths can be told and without being judged. And we work together to under the guidance of the Spirit in the love of Christ to take these two different narratives, because indigenous people, they've experienced the really shadow side of colonialism, and we've suppressed it. And so to have somebody say, do you see what you're doing here? Yeah. Let me tell you how that feels and where that's coming from and what it looks like. We need to create those spaces if we're going to heal our land and heal our church.
Does your faith feel thin or rushed? If you're spiritually hungry for depth and beauty, Heaven Meets Earth is for you. In this new devotional, philosopher-artist Josh Nadeau invites you into a deeper engagement with faith through a 40-day visual journey of the Nicene Creed, revealing the sacred in the ordinary. With stunning iconographic art and profound theological reflection, Heaven Meets Earth bridges ancient Christian tradition and modern life. It's designed for those weary of surface-level spirituality. guiding you to encounter God through contemplation, prayer, and beauty. Whether you're seeking to deepen your faith during Lent or need a spiritual refresh, discover how heaven meets earth in your daily life. Get your copy of Heaven Meets Earth today and embrace the beauty of belief.
This month on the Salvation Army's weekly podcast, Words of Life, we're wrapping up a series where we've been focused on Christian writers and authors of all kinds. And beginning March 11th, we'll start sharing a testimony where you'll hear from members of a Salvation Army band right after they returned home from a powerful trip and ministry opportunity in South Africa.
One of the lasting effects that I have of the entire trip was hearing the kids sing back to us.
There's a chorus that says, "What shall I render to Jehovah, for he has done so much for me?" And to hear kids who have been abandoned sing that with every bit of their spirit back to God, I will never forget that.
Listen to Words of Life wherever you get your podcasts or visit wordsoflifepodcast.org.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like we've blunted our own imaginations about what this could be by bracketing out the perspectives of other people. A lot of times I use the analogy of I used to be into art. I used to do a lot of art in high school. Okay. And so, you'd have the still life basket of fruit in the middle of the table, right? The stereotypical still life. And then people would sit around the table and draw it. And no matter how accurately you rendered your side of that basket, there was an aspect of it that somebody else was seeing that you couldn't. And it just feels to me like that's the spirit of the work that you're doing, is you're saying, like, look, these folks, we've closed ourselves off and we've decided that it's only our perspective that matters, that it captures the truth of the basket. And that's obviously not the case.
Yeah.
Because people are seeing this from different angles, and it's not a denial of what you're seeing. It's a supplementation, a broadening of our understanding of truth because we're pulling in different perspectives. Now, obviously, some of the things that we have to be corrected as well. And that's where some of this stuff starts to come in, but I don't know. I just find this to be I like the way you approach the work in terms of combating that settler narrative, because I really feel like it's the stories that we're telling ourselves that are creating and perpetuating some of these enduring structures.
Exactly.
As opposed to trying to, and you said it, it's not about placing blame at this point. Like, we've all been living with this kind of unwittingly for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so we've got to get underneath and understand why the story's wrong. Yeah. And fix it.
Yeah, there is a considerable legacy of colonialism going on in this land. And it's so important to just get this sense that I hear this that too. Yeah, you can't blame me for what happened in the past. I don't take ownership of that, and that's exactly right. I can't be responsible for this massacre or this deceitful thing, but as a servant of Christ, I suggest I do have an obligation to bring healing into this space. And that requires some pretty difficult work to own that history and to say, all right, how having acknowledged, because if we don't acknowledge it, then we don't go anywhere. And as you know, we have a movement in the United States right now to replace the history with the mythology once again, and to reset and replace and restore that myth of innocence that says we're not going to talk about any of the bad stuff. We're only going to talk about the good stuff. Because talking about the bad stuff is a downer and it makes people uncomfortable. But talk about the good stuff makes us feel good about ourselves. And so there are those patterns there. Those go all the way back to the colonial era. And at some point, we've got to rewrite the script.
I ask you kind of a curveball question. I don't know whether you've thought about this much, but when you look out at sort of trends like globalization or the advancement of technology and, the sort of fetish we have for progress, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
do you see in that sort of resonances of the settler narrative that these like almost echoes, that these are non-landed, right? Extensions almost of the settler narrative.
Yeah. Maybe not of the settler narrative, but of the colonial narrative. So kind of neo-colonialism now on the part, it's not so much nations as multinational corporations.
Yeah.
And so colonialism has I think is morphing yet again as nation states kind of move away or deal with the legacies of European colonialism in various ways. But settler colonialism is a subset of the colonial process, and the difference between settler colonials and garden variety colonizers is that settler colonists want land. They're after land that they can use, as opposed to most of the expressions of colonialism, European colonialism, that went into places to exploit labor, exploit natural resources, take the wealth back to the colonial center. So
that's
the United
helpful.
States, the United States is a settler colonial state. Canada, Australia, so on and so forth. Israel, some would say, it's after land.
Yeah.
So
we've got about 10 minutes left, so I kind of want to jump into what do we do about this? I think you've done a really good job in the book of kind of laying out all the different aspects of the narrative. And I know we're not scratching the surface on those, right, which we weren't really intending to in a 45-minute podcast. That's why you wrote a book. But as just everyday Christians look out at this thing and they say, what do I do? Mm-hmm. I don't want to become an activist, but I do want to address these things, and I need to understand how to approach some of the history that I've really become accustomed to, in ways that allow me to start unwinding that settler narrative and really start understanding. I would argue that it's a matter of discipleship, understanding and putting that history that we learn under the authority of Christ, so that the truth really is what matters, not some sanitized narrative.
Right.
So what advice would you give for Christians who are just sort of moving into this after you've been in it for a long time?
Yeah. Well, I've walked this path. So the first thing to do, I think, just based on my own experience, is just learn, read, and particularly if you're captured by this, look into the stories of your own locale. Who are the indigenous peoples who are here? What happened to them? Why are they no longer here? Where are they? And when you begin to go down that line, then and I begin to address your own local stories, then you can have a sense of how this whole process has impacted the perspectives and the practices. And it may not be directed toward indigenous people; it may be directed toward other people. But once you get a sense of how that's worked in your own space, you begin to kind of develop a larger perspective. A great book called Healing Haunted Histories by Elaine Enns and Ched Myers is a good way to, very practical way to look into that, talk about how the stories are, and they talk about family stories. They both provide us resources and really expose some things. So I would say that. The other thing I would say is begin to make connections with indigenous people. So go to powwows. visit an Indian center when there's an event, or just and just begin and acquaint yourself with some of the issues that various Indigenous people are facing, socially, politically, whatever, and get a sense of how you might or are inclined to stand with them locally or nationally. Those are 3 out of a number.
Just one question. I mean, I have a ton of questions, but I only have time for a couple, so I'm picking them. Thinking about what content we consume. We're in a world right now that media has become increasingly proficient at reinforcing whatever narrative it is that we happen to believe in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, folks who are listening to this podcast may be sitting there quasi-offended or frustrated that this conversation is happening or what have you. If it may hit some people wrong, I guess is all I'm saying.
Sure.
And so, I mean, aside from encouraging, what I try to encourage listeners to do is just calm, thoughtful, theological conversation, right? Don't be offended. Think about it, right? You don't have to accept it, but don't reject it either.
Yeah.
But as you interact with content, and I know you're in a more scholarly space, what advice would you give to people about where to turn for good wisdom on these matters? How do they interact with the news on a nightly basis? How do they interact with you know what I'm saying? How do they escape? Because you're talking about unwinding a narrative, but the narrative's all around us. So,
and the media, as we all know, makes a bundle by keeping us separated and kind of getting us looking at the extremes rather than finding a way to come together. I think humility is a big part of the enterprise, where I just want to follow Christ and respect you and hear you. And as you said, let's not go into this with me trying to defend myself or my beliefs. I don't think Christ is looking for defenders right now. He's looking for disciples. Yeah. And the way and the voices, I think you've and why I appreciate podcasts like this. I mean, if we can find some places where people are actually modeling congenial, respectful conversations together, I think not only will we find a way forward, but we'll find some healing. I mean, we're not, as you alluded, we're not going to we're not going to help ourselves ultimately as individuals or a nation by just defending our position against that other group. And we're children, we're disciples of Jesus Christ. Let's be a peaceable people. Let's put relationships over ideology or doctrine. Let's love each other.
Yeah. Seems like a pretty simple thing to do, right?
Yeah, may sound a little sappy to some, but really, I mean, how can you love God whom you cannot see if you do not love your brother or sister whom you do see, right?
Yeah. I think it's really good. I mean, I appreciate not only the book, but I appreciate hearing kind of your journey with this, because it's led you to some really cool places. You mentioned before the podcast, you're going to be working on the translation committee with Terry Wildman, who I've had on the show before, but maybe talk a little bit about that as sort of this is a nice journey you've had through this. I mean, you start with just the basic Old Testament stuff, right? Doing some good work there. And then all of a sudden you end up writing a book that's really outside your niche. I mean, you know what I'm saying? There's something about a specialty that tends to keep you narrow, but you've really gone a different direction. And so, just talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing on the editorial board.
Well, the Translation Council.
Translation.
So, Terry and his wife Darlene are folks that I met while I was out speaking, and we have just become really great friends. And So you may be aware that Psalms and Proverbs, First Nations version, has been published as well. Yep. And so actually, Terry invited me up to the Translation Council when they began work to launch that particular volume and asked me if I would serve as a Hebrew language consultant. And I immediately said yes, because I will play my hand here. I love being in Indigenous space. It's just so healing, and it's different. Yeah. And it nourishes my soul, and just being a part of that group, the way they think, the way they talk, the way they honor Christ, is just I'm so grateful. So IVP wants to do the whole Old Testament, I guess. So Terry calls me up after we get the Psalms and Proverbs out, and he says, "Hey, you feel like doing Genesis through 2 Kings?" I said, "Sure, let's do it."
That sounds great. Yeah,
and it's been a great experience. I'm sure Terry kind of talked to you about all the decisions that have to be made, and how difficult that is to reframe translation in an Indigenous mode.
Well, and you all are cranking them out at a pace that I wouldn't anticipate as possible. So kudos to that. But yeah, it was a fascinating conversation. He was really helpful. And so I feel like these conversations are kind of leading me down a path as well, which is great. And so really appreciate you being here today to talk this through. We're kind of up on time, so I want to respect your time as well. But this has been fantastic, and really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for the invitation. As you may have detected, this topic lights me up, and I so much appreciate your invitation to talk about it and see where things go.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, so this is an IVP published book. I think you probably picked that up. So listeners get 20%. There's a discount code in the show notes. And so if you order it off of IVP's website, which that link will be there as well, and you put in the discount code, you'll get 20% off this book. I would really recommend it. I think Undoing Manifest Destiny approaches this tie. It's one of the books I've read that I felt was very approachable for someone who might be new to this conversation. I thought it was just a really nice way to enter this conversation and think about it. And so I'd recommend it highly. Check it out. Undoing Manifest Destiny, Settler America, Christian Colonists, and the Pursuit of Justice by L. Daniel Hawk. And like I said, the link will be there in the show notes. So again, Daniel, thanks for being here. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Take care, everybody. Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Finding uplifting news in today's headlines is often like searching for a needle in a haystack. At the Story Behind podcast, we believe in the power of finding heartwarming tales and are happy to share empowering stories with you every week. Get inspired by the note a waitress received from a patron dining alone, and even hear about how one VIP passenger made a hardworking pilot get emotional before his flight. To start listening to the Story Behind podcast, visit lifeaudio.com